Welcome to CodeRage Mobile. This is Create iOS Applications that Work with Enterprise Web Services and Multi-Tier Architectures session. My name is Pawel Glowacki. I'm Embarcadero Technical Lead for EMEA for Delphi and RAD Studio. And today I'm going to just focus on live demos of creating applications with Delphi XE4 and specifically iOS applications that works with enterprise services. The first demo will be focusing on DataSnap technology, so I'm going to create a DataSnap database server, very simple, that just exposes data from Interbase database and create for it an iOS client that is going to take data from the server and using visual live bindings display this data in the mobile iOS applications. In the second demo, I'm going to focus on standard SOAP XML web services. So I'm going to create a SOAP web service in Delphi. The functionality of this service will be to create an email validation, and I'm going to create a simple iOS client that will communicate with this SOAP XML web services using an WSDL importer generated code. Okay, so in the first demo I'm going to create two projects. First I'm going to create a DataSnap server project that will just expose data from the underlying Interbase database. Okay. Let's go. In the DataSnap server, I'm going to create a standalone DataSnap server as a VCL forms application. I'm going to use HTTP protocol. I'm going to select a default port to be 8901. It's always a good idea to see if this port is free. And I'm going to make sure that my server methods class is based on DS server module, because I'm going to expose data from the underlying database using T-dataset provider components. Okay, so I'm going to save this application as a simple database server. I'm going to create a new folder for my application. DB is a very nice folder. Main form will be just unit 10, a server container unit, default names, server methods unit, and my project will be called simple DataSnap DB server. Okay, so I'm not going to focus too much on anatomy of a DataSnap server. So basically, I have just a main form before, because I have selected the VCL forms application. I have also a server container unit with some components that were generated by the wizard, and the functionality of my server is actually inside of the server methods class. So I'm not going to write any code, because my server is supposed to expose some data from the underlying database. When you install Delphi XE4 or RAD Studio XE4, you will also get an Interbase installed, and also there will be an employee database pre-installed for you. So I'm going to actually focus on this customer data. I can actually preview it here live inside of the IDE. So this is the data I want to serve to my iOS client. So in order to do it, probably the easiest thing is to just take this customer node and drag it onto the data module. So this is my employee database and the SQL dataset that is already pointing to the customer database. The last step in implementation of the server is to add a T-dataset provider component to the form. I'm going to actually call it CDS DSP customer, so I know which table it's pointing to. In general case, I could have a multiple dataset providers on the form, so it makes sense to give them some meaningful names. I need to hook this dataset provider to my dataset, and in this moment my application is fully functional. So in order to create an iOS client for it, I need to have it running. So instead of running this application locally here in Delphi, I have decided to make it more realistic, and I have deployed it into my cloud. So here inside of AWS Amazon Web Services, I have an EC2 instance running where I have deployed this application. So notice this is the IP address of my machine, and also the port number is 8901, so that's something I need to know. Another thing is that I can actually remotely connect, so this is actually a remote desktop connection to my machine, and this is this program that is running currently and listening on port HTTP 8901. So it is important because I'm going to create an application inside Delphi, inside of the virtual machine, but then I'm going to deploy it to the simulator or to the device. So that I need to make sure that I can actually communicate with my server. Okay, so this is my server, so now it's time to create a client for it. So I'm going to create a brand new FireMonkey mobile application. I'm going to go for a just blank application. And in this application, I'm going to just add a functionality to connect to the DataSnap server. Here is my DB, so I'm going to stick with this folder, and this is my form client unit, and my application will be simple DB client. Okay, so this is just an empty form. I need to somehow add functionality to connect to my DataSnap server. The easiest way to do so is to use a wizard. So I'm going to use a file new other, and in the DataSnap server category there is a DataSnap client module wizard I can use to conveniently connect to my server. I'm going to select remote server as an option where my server is located. I know that that's a DataSnap standalone server. The protocol to be used is HTTP, and I'm also going to make sure that I have specified a correct address of my server and correct port, which is 8901. So now I can see from inside of the client wizard if I can actually connect to this remote machine. I see that I can connect. In fact, without being able to connect, the client wizard would not continue, because it needs to be able to connect to the server at design time to query for the functionality of the server and to generate some using proxy generator to generate code. So this wizard will add to my client project two new files, so it's always a good idea to save it. So client module unit and also a client classes unit. So if I would be actually trying to invoke methods on my server directly, there are some methods that were generated by the wizard echo string and reverse string. So I could use this client classes unit to make calls to this method. So I would need to instantiate this tserver methods client class, make a connection with a dbx connection component, and then I would be able to call these methods. But this demo is not for talking to the invoking these methods directly. I want to be able to connect to the underlying database that is there on the server. So the wizard itself also generated for me a data module with a SQL connection component that is already pre-configured to point to my server. So you can see that things that I have entered into the wizard are already there. The protocol, the port, the host name. Also, conveniently, I don't have a login prompt set, so I can use it directly. So again, this would be the client module that I would call its property server methods one client of the same type as this one type of a client proxy to call methods. But in this demo, I'm just focusing on accessing a database. So here, if I want to access a database, I need to add some components. So the one component I need to add is a TDS provider connection component that needs to be connected to the SQL connection component, and also I need to specify the server class name. So that's if I don't know much about the server, that could be a difficult point. In ideal world I would see here a combo box, but luckily I can actually find out what is the name from the generated code. So the proxy generator is using this convention that is taking the name of the server methods class and is appending client to it. So I know that this is the actual name of my server methods class, so I can actually conveniently paste it here. Okay, so in the client module I have my DS provider connection component configured, and now I need to add a client dataset component. So the client dataset component needs to be connected to the provider connection through its remote server property, and here I should see the provider names that are actually at the server. So at that moment, at design time, I have connected with the server and queried it method to get me all the names of the providers that are there. So I have only one provider, so this is my DSP customer provider. I can actually now make this active. At this moment I can actually see data that are there. Data from the server at design time actually were downloaded into the client dataset. So I can actually name this client dataset so it has some meaningful name, CDS customer. Okay, so at that moment I'm pretty good in terms of the database access. Now I'm ready to actually build user interface for it. So first of all, this is my main form, but I need to add to the users clause of this main form this class where I have all the database access components. So I need to add it to the users clause. So now I see this is added to the users clause. Okay, so I'm going now to add to this simple application to the form. I'm going to add a T-tab control component that will host two tabs. So typically what you do is to align it to the client, and I'm going to add two tabs to it, one tab and a second tab, and I'm going to actually make the tab control so you can control how tabs are displayed. So by default they are tab position top, but in fact I don't want to see this at all, because I'm going to navigate between tabs programmatically. So I'm going on the first tab, I'm going to add to toolbar a component which is a standard component for displaying some header information, and also there's something I'm going to add to the second tab, because there will be a different elements on both toolbars, on my first tab and on my second tab. Okay, so that's my first tab. So this tab is going to contain a T list view component. So the T list view component is designed for being bound to data sets. It can be a lot of data, so it's scrollable, and I can control the appearance of the list view. I'm going to stick with a default appearance here to make it easy. So I have a list view. In fact, I can actually change it, list view customer, so I know that this is my list view customer. And now I'm actually ready to use visual live bindings to bind this list view to my customer information. So I'm going to select view live bindings designer, and you can see in my designer that I see my list view, and also in different color is a client dataset on a client module, but it is visible because I have added it to the users clause. So I'm going to make sure that my list view is synchronized with my underlying client dataset, and I'm going to bind the customer field to the item text property, so I can immediately see that my data is actually displayed in the list view. So at design time I can see the information from the underlying table. Okay, so that's my main form. In fact, what I can also do to make it a little bit more interesting, I can use visual live bindings to actually navigate in the underlying data set. For this, I'm going to add two speed buttons to my form. Here I'm going to change the first style of the first button to be something that would suggest that we are going to go down in the underlying data set, and I'm going to actually copy this button because I need two of them, and I'm going to change its icon that would suggest that I'm going up. So actually I can just directly here arrow up tool button. Actually that would not work, so I want to select it from here like this. Okay, so I have two buttons. So how do I connect them to the underlying data set? So I'm going to add a T action list component to the form, and one of the actions that I can actually define are actions to actually navigate in the underlying dataset. So you see there are live bindings actions, and I want to select the prior and next action. So I select both of them, click on OK, and I will get these two actions added to my form. So these actions need to be connected to the bind source. So this component was added automatically to my form. So I'm going to select both actions, and they have a property called data source that needs to be connected to the bind source DB. In this way, I have two actions defined, but I need to hook these actions to my visual component. So this one will go to the next record, and this will go to the previous records. Okay, prior record. So this is kind of okay. So I have first form with just a list of individual customers. What I want to do right now is to actually also define a way to actually display some more information about the currently selected customer. So I'm going to define on the second tab this information. So I'm going to actually put here some controls. So I'm going to put a big label component here on the top. So this will display the current customer. So I'm going to name this customer, so I know that this is the label for displaying customers. It's always a good idea to actually define a style lookup to be this tool label, so it has this look and feel. Also, I want to have here, maybe also it's a good idea to use anchors. So if I have some bigger size of the form, it will use the maximum, occupy maximum space. And I can also add some additional information. So to make it look nice, I'm going to use a T listbox component, to display some more specific information about the currently selected customer. So I'm going to make it align to the right as well, so this will nicely show in different orientations. I'm going to add some listbox items to this form, listbox item and listbox item. So let's keep it simple, so just first name, last name and the telephone number. So I'm going to change this listbox item text to first, this is going to be last, and this is going to be my phone. Okay, phone. And I also need to add some labels to actually display this information. So I'm going to add a T label component to this first element here, also making it bigger, and add an anchor to the right. And I need more of them, so I'm going to add them to individual listbox item. So I'm using FireMonkey. So in FireMonkey, all components can contain other components. So in this case, I have these labels contain inside of my listbox item. So to make sure that I know which is which, I'm going to name them correctly. So I have label 1, label first, label last, and label, this one is label last, that's correct, and this will be label phone. Okay, so now I'm actually ready to bind these labels to other fields in the underlying dataset. So for this, I'm going to go back into the Live Bindings Designer, and he's getting more busy, but I will find out what I want to add. So my label first should be bound to the contact first. My label last should be bound to the label last. My label customer should be bound to the customer field, and my label phone should be bound to my phone number. Okay, so in this case, I've been able to actually connect this data. So the one thing that I'm missing is actually functionality to navigate back and forth from one tab to another. So for this, I'm going to add here a button, T-speed button, and place it somewhere here with a convenient style, so it will suggest that I'm going back. So I can actually use different styles. For example, I can have this back button, but to conserve some space, I'm going to make it like this, so it's quite obvious what it's doing. So in order to navigate between tabs, I'm going to use actions. So here I'm going to define two more actions. A new standard action, and this is a change tab action. So one change tab action and a second change tab action. So I typically like to give them names that suggest where they navigate to. So the first change tab action 1 will be changed to detail. So this is my detail information where this screen will be displayed. So I can actually select this tab, and this will be change tab action list. Okay, so very important is to make sure that it looks nice, that this change tab actions has the transition property set to slide, so I get this nice sliding, and I need to hook those actions to appropriate tabs. So let's make sure that these tabs actually have correct names. So I have a tab item 1 that contains my list view. I'm going to name it tab item list, and this other tab will have a name tab item detail. Okay, so now I can hook those change tab action detail will navigate to this tab item detail, and the change tab action list will navigate to this other. Okay, so now I need to hook these actions to some components. So this is the component to navigate to the list, and on the other screen I'm going to navigate to invoke this action programmatically. So when the end user selects a certain customer, I'm going to navigate programmatically. So in the events here, I have actually on item click event that is I'm just going to invoke this other action the name is change tab action detail and execute target. Okay, you can pass whatever, for example self. Okay, so this seems to be quite good. So I have my simulator already running. Let's see if we can run this application correctly. Okay, so the application is being run. So I have already started PA server. This is a virtual machine, so when the iOS simulator will start, I'm going to see my running application inside of the simulator. So it's deploying. Okay, so there is one thing that I already know that I'm missing, so that would not work. And the reason is why it would not work is because I need to deploy additional file. So the one thing that I have used in this data module is a client dataset, and the client dataset requires additional library to be deployed to the target machine. So in the project deployment, I have different list of different files that are being deployed to the client, and I need to add to it also the Midas library. So this is, if I open it, I can see that this is actually the lib Midas dilib additional file that needs to be deployed. So now I should be actually ready to deploy my application correctly. So click on run again, so that should take faster because my application is already compiled. So it will invoke simulator on the other side, and in a moment I should see my application running. So it's currently in the state deploying, so it's deploying my simple DB client. Okay, so that's my application. So notice that I'm at the beginning of the data set, so this prior button is disabled because there is no point in moving. I can actually navigate through the individual customers. If I click on a individual customer, I can see the detailed information about this customer. I can go back, click on some other customer, and in this way I was able to very quickly build a client for displaying information from the underlying database. So just to recap this demo, what I have done here, I have created an iOS mobile client using visual live bindings and list view component, a listbox component, and also generated using DataSnap client module wizard. I have generated components and code to connect to the DataSnap server that has been deployed to the Amazon Web Services EC2 instance and is accessing the underlying database that was deployed to this instance as well. So in this way I can create a multi-tier database application using Delphi XE4. In the second demo, I'm going to build an email validation SOAP web service with Delphi, and then I'm going to quickly build an iOS client for it. Also, I'm going to deploy my SOAP web service into the Amazon Web Services cloud. Okay, so let's start from a new other, and in this case I'm going to use a SOAP server application. I'm going to go for a default standalone VCL application. For the port, I'm going to use 8902. I'm going to test the port. It seems to be okay. Click on finish, and the wizard will generate for me an empty SOAP web service application. The wizard also asked me if I want to create an interface for my SOAP module. Yes, I want to create it. The service name will be email checker, and I'm going to click on OK. I'm not going to generate any methods for it. Okay, so that's SOAP web service. I'm going to save it. Doesn't really matter where, because I already have this service pre-built. I just want to show you how you can implement it step by step. So the functionality of the web service you need to define as methods in the email checker interface. So there are two files. There is an interface definition, and then there is an implementation, which is just a class that implements the interface that we define. So this class will be instantiated on the server, and I need to provide the functionality in this class. Okay, so I'm going to add methods to this class. So I'm going to add isValid email, and I'm going to pass a value as a string, and this method will return a boolean value to find out if it's a valid email address. So it's a you can see here there is a command that I need to add a standard call as a calling convention, so that's something I need to add here as well. So I'm going to do it via regular expressions. So when I have this functionality already on the server, I'm also going to define a more generic function isMatch that will take a value, so the string to be validated, and a pattern, so the regular expression if you want to provide one, and it will also return boolean if there is a match between value and the regular expression. Okay, so that's my interface. I need to save it, and these two methods need to be copied into the implementation of my server. So I'm going to go into this other, and I have here, I need to copy these two methods because in the code we say, okay, this class implements email checker interface, so I need to make sure that these two methods are defined here as well. So let me go here, and now I'm going to use a code completion, Ctrl+Shift+C, to generate just bodies of my functions. So to keep this demo short, I already have some code generated. So I'm going to actually add the actual implementation of these two methods. I'm going to delegate to a class that is defined in a separate unit. So I'm going to add to this unit Delphi, and I'm going to call it regular expressions util. So that's unit. So that's just the name of the this unit, and the code is already generated. So I'm going to actually copy it from here to save on typing. Copy, and here I'm going to actually just replace this with the code. So notice there is a class called regular expressions engine, and that has two class functions, so I don't have to instantiate this class. There is isMatch and isValidEmail. So in Delphi we have this regular expression unit that implements regular expressions, so there is a lot of support for this. There is also regular expressions core, so you can see that this is actually implementing the regular expression engine, but I only need from this there is this regular expression regex record that has methods isMatch, and you can specify, actually I'm using this one, isMatch, with the input and pattern that returns boolean. So in my unit I'm using this function to actually implement this verification. So the one function is for generic regular expressions, and second function already has the regular expression that validates email address built-in. So instead of providing this expression is already provided. So I need to make sure that I'm using this function. So I'm going to use unit. So this is my util unit, and here I can actually say something like this: result, and the name of my class. So regular expression engine. So isMatch, and there is an value and pattern. Okay, and the second one is just simple as well: result regular expression engine isValidEmail, I just provide value. So in this way I have implemented this web service. In fact, I could run it locally, so just to see how this works. So I can start it locally, I open the browser, and I have see this is the actually WSDL that I need to use to generate a client. So this is an interface definition, standard SOAP WSDL that I need to actually use as a starting point for generating the client. So at this stage I can actually take and create a client. So I have already done it, but just very quickly I'm going to show you the steps. I could create a file new other and just Delphi a mobile application, blank application. I can save it. Okay, and project will be my SOAP client, and the process here is similar like I've been doing with DataSnap. I was using Wizard to generate all the necessary code on the client, so I'm going to use the same approach here. So I'm going to add to this project a code generated by the WSDL importer. So the WSDL importer requires that I specify the location of this service. So notice that was my open browser, so I can actually just to generate it here. This is my WSDL. I can copy this link, and inside Delphi I can actually provide it here just like this, and it should actually generate the methods. So it generated an email checker interface with isValidEmail and isMatch function. So if I want to actually check that this WSDL, I can just call the getEmailChecker global function that returns a reference to this interface, and I have access to the functionality of the server. So this server is actually running as well on in the cloud. So instead of finishing this project, I'm going to actually close it and show you the already existing project that I have created with some more clients and some more functionality. So this is my project is here. So I have the whole group of projects. So there is a regular expression SOAP service that is deployed to the server. I have also 3 different clients talking to the very same application. So I have this regular expression mobile client that is using this code that was generated from the wizard, and very simple implementation. So it's just one button, and I can enter certain address and see if it's a valid email address. So notice this is the whole code that was generated here. So I'm using this other unit, and here I basically pass the contents of the edit into this method to find out if it's valid or not. So let me run this application in the simulator, so you can actually see if this is what should be how it should be working. So I'm going to run it, so that it should be there is nothing to deploy extra. I'm not using the client dataset or anything like this. So that's my application. I can see this seems to be a valid email address, but I can actually change it. So I can, for example, if I remove it like this, it will tell me that this does not look like a valid email address. Also, there are some cases, like for example, if I do something like this, it's not trivial to validate email addresses. So if you would write your own routine, in many cases you would be scanning for the add character to make sure that there is a dot in the second part of the string, but the just C for top level type of the domain is not a valid email address. So this will also tells me that this is not a valid address. So this functionality is working inside of the mobile application. What is also interesting, I have a project group. So here I have this regular expression code is also a desktop FireMonkey application. This could be also a VCL application. So here I can compile for Windows and for Mac. So maybe let's first compile for Windows. So the WSDL code is generated is the same for all 3 projects. So I see that this is working correctly. Also, I can switch to Mac and run this application as a Mac application. So again, this is just a matter of recompiling the application, my platform assistant server is already running, so it's also used for deploying Mac application. So in a moment I should see a Mac version of my application, so I can actually verify if it's a valid email address. The last client that I have implemented is actually a unit test. So in Delphi you can, using a file new other, I can create a special type of the project, which is a test project, so I can just verify that certain functionality is working. So the test project can contain a number of test cases. So this last project is actually a test case. So this is a code that was generated by the wizard. So just a class that derives from test case. And this class basically there are some methods that generated by the wizard that basically creates a class that you want to test and destroy in the setup and teardown methods. So I don't use them because there is nothing to instantiate, but I am using this irec expressions code, and I'm going to check true or false if certain email addresses are okay. So I'm expecting that this will be a correct address, so I'm basically checking if this is true, but I'm expecting that these other addresses will be false. So in this case I'm basically checking for the false condition. So these methods check true, check false, they are all inherited from t-test case. And here at the bottom I see that my this test has been registered. So there is a global registered test function that I need to specify the type of this class. So all methods that are defined as published will be automatically invoked in a test runner. So here I can actually start this project and it will display a visual GUI runner, and I can actually very quickly find out that my web service has been implemented correctly. Okay, so this finishes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Bruce McGee says thanks for kudos for unit testing. Absolutely, great way.
Yeah, that's actually, if you create enterprise applications, they typically are made of different parts. So it's not only client, but also the non-visual server. So using unit tests in both DataSnap and web services is a great way to sleep well, that you know that if you do some radical changes to your server side, everything is still there. So I do suggest using a unit test for some real-life projects. This is also kind of a real documentation of the project where you can test for some corner cases as well. So also good fun.
And then several people asked for the example, especially the SOAP example for the email checking. Are those linked off your blog, or were those part of the original?
I'm going to make them available on my blog. So tomorrow morning, the first thing I will put this source code from this session to Code Central, and I will make a blog post that will link to it. So all the source code that I have presented today, both demos, will be available tomorrow latest for anybody interested in having a look.
I think it was Sandro earlier there were a couple of people asking about if they took a picture, for example, they have an iOS client, they take a picture and then they want to send that picture to a DataSnap server or to a web service. That's a lot of data to be sending, right? I mean, if you send the full resolution on a high-res camera from a device, any suggestions about either encrypting? I know there's things like fractal compression and other things people might do. Anything that's sort of best practices, open up a heavyweight callback channel and send it?
I think that there are different ways how you can approach it. In fact, most of the most common file formats for images are already compressed, like JPEG or PNG. So probably by using extra compression, will not get any savings in terms of real making the amount of byte to be sent smaller. But you could have a look on different types of parameters that are sent. So you can use a T-stream This is a parameter that is actually supported in DataSnap, so DataSnap understands how to send streams, so that would be a natural candidate. That's also possible to actually encode. If you, for example, want to work with SOAP web services, then typical strategy is to try to stick to a simple type. So you can, for example, encode your binary content of arbitrary binary content as a string and pass as a string. If it's really big, you can think about basically programmatically making it in a smaller chunks and send chunk by chunk. So there are different possibilities you could apply. You can also, if something is really big, I would suggest also look into the one of the Amazon Web Services services is a simple storage that is very fast, and so basically you could have a kind of a hybrid application that using Cloud API you could refer to the actual binary large content that is stored inside of the S3 service. So that would be also a possible idea.
And I know blobs are supported both in Microsoft Azure and Amazon S3, right?
Yes, and also you can store the blobs inside of your database. So if you define your interface, that's one of the really database technologies that we should be really proud of, and you can store data in a blob field as well. So that's an option as well.
Then there was a sort of related question, if someone has a client data set, and they want to send the client data set from a client back. I mean, built into client data set and the Midas technology is the ability to do apply updates where it'll take the changes and send those back as a delta variant array, and then the dataset provider will turn those into SQL update statements. So unless maybe he's creating fields on the fly and he wants to take the contents of a data set and client data set and shove it back to this DataSnap server, any advice on passing a whole client data set, or again, passing
the whole client data set maybe is not a very good strategy, but the client data sets are quite convenient also for like for a poor man's database, if you like. So there is this load from file and save to file method. So basically you can save the contents of the client dataset as either binary value or as an XML packet. So in Delphi for iOS, you can do all kinds of file operations. So instead of, for example, saving data into a local interbase embedded database like in the previous sessions, the IB2Go, you can also store it locally as just a file, and this file and this string can be also sent back. But in fact, like you said, we have the DataSnap technology provides an easy way to send back updates to the server. They are automatically resolved. So basically, in this demo, that was only 45 minutes, and I wanted to squeeze both DataSnap technology and SOAP technology. So obviously, that was only read-only in this demo. So we were just downloading data from the server and displaying them. But modifying data on the client, like doing inserts, updates, deletes, can be done very easily. So all those changes are actually maintained within the client data set in its delta property, and you have to programmatically call client dataset method apply updates, and all the updates are then sent back to the server and resolved to the underlying database. So that's probably the easiest and the fastest way. And the framework provides this functionality, so why not to use it?
And again, with DataSnap, you can use TCP, HTTP, and HTTPS, right?
Yes, correct. So basically, there are many. Actually, I have some customers asking because when you start to rely on DataSnap as a technology for your real system, one of the main concerns is always security. So in DataSnap, we have a very good support for security, so you can think about the security on different levels. So on the level of the transport, so just by using HTTPS transport, you get an encryptions basically out of the box without special things that you do. You just need to actually install an SSL certificate on the server, and there is Wizard also knows about it, so it's relatively straightforward. On the second level, you can use encryption filter. So in the Wizard, you can actually select either compression filter or an encryption filter. So out of the box with Delphi, we get RSA and PC1 filters that provides encryption. There is also very interesting blog post from Daniele Tetti from BitTime from Italy, great expert. He posted a collection of different encryption filters for DataSnap. So you can, the architecture is open, you can basically implement your own custom super secure filter. And then going higher up, we have the authentication and authorization framework. So depending on who is talking to your server, you can expose a different functionality depending on roles. And at the end, you can implement your own custom security scheme, like for example, generating session tokens and expecting that every server methods needs to actually get a valid session token, that something maybe for the future to build into the DataSnap framework. But that's plenty of options, and the architecture here is very flexible.
Excellent. Thanks, Pawel.
I wish everybody to have a very informative and very nice and funny time today and tomorrow.
Let's see. Alf asking, what if some other find the server port and manage new app that bypass securities and misuse data? Well, I mean, again, it's all of our jobs to architect our systems to keep people from exploiting and finding open ways to ports and whatever, right? Firewalls, everything else. You have to use all the security tricks in the world, right, Pawel?
For example, when you deploy in real world, when you want to have a systems that, actually that's something that I've been showing a number of times on different events, is basically asking a question, do you want to be rich? And typically audience were first confused, and yes, we want. And then if you realize how big is the potential of distributing your applications through App Store, and suddenly if you build a client server systems and your applications is downloaded hundreds and thousands of times, and all of these people try to access your one server, you need to make sure that you are prepared for your own success. So you really want to deploy your server side to a scalable infrastructure. So one of the leaders on the market, something that we used to have even a wizard, is Amazon Web Services and the EC2 cloud infrastructure. So this is where you can also set very precisely security policies, specifying who on which port, even from which ports. For example, when you deploy really a multi-tier application, when you have a servers that needs to be visible to outside world, but your database instance only needs to be visible to the server, so you can specify in your security policies that only the connections from a certain IP address are accepted. So it's really a lot of, you need to be very precise and detailed and careful how you configure security, but still you can do it at the level of the firewall inside of your machine, and then using whatever given infrastructure provides you.
Yep. Again, thanks, Pawel.